Well, welcome to another week of Connect Groups. I want to start this week's video off by just telling you a quick story. When I was in high school, my family bought me a horse. I had been raised around horses, but I had never officially owned one myself. And so this horse was my horse to be worked with on a regular basis. And luckily from the get-go, this horse and I bonded really well, which is important because anytime that you're trying to train a horse or develop a horse, you want there to be a trust level. You want to be able to trust the horse yourself, and that the horse needs to be able to trust you. And so it was good that we kind of had that bond initially. But slowly but surely, as we began to develop the horse, as we began to spend hours with her and invest in her and teach her how to lunge and teach her how to lead and teach her how to ride, she began to kind of catch on pretty quickly, which was good. So for the most part, it was a smooth kind of training process, if you will. But there were a couple rough patches along the way. If you didn't know this already, most horses are herd animals, and so they love to be in the herd. And Mocha developed a habit which we would call barn sour, which means anytime that she was separated from the other horses and the other horses were in the barn, her natural instinct was to be right there next to her other horses. And so anytime that I would separate her, she would do everything in her power to try and get back to the herd. And this became very difficult because even at times she would take off at a full gallop to try and get back to the barn. And I remember one particular time as she just took off for a gallop, and as she was heading back to the barn, I could recognize in front of me that there was this tree branch that was coming up, and so she almost clotheslined me. Luckily, I bailed and was safe and fine, but this was something that was very difficult to train out of her. She kind of always struggled with it, but eventually it got better and better. And one method that I found that worked really well with her and actually works well with most horses is positive reinforcement. So if she did a good behavior, if she did not run back to the barn, or if she would stay in a place when I asked her to whoa or asked her to stand, I would treat her to something. I would either give her a pat and positive reinforcement, encouragement, or I would give her a treat, or I would let her kind of graze in a greener pasture nearby. And so this really, in her, gave that positive reinforcement and a change in behavior. But I also recognize that I never, ever wanted to reinforce a negative behavior. Because what I found is anytime that I reinforced a negative behavior, it just led to further disobedience, or it just led to further negative behaviors. And I never wanted it to result in injury of me or injury in another rider or even injury of her. And so I never gave negative reinforcement, never gave a reinforcement to a negative behavior. And I tell you this story because God, in His absolute love and absolute perfect desire to be in relationship with you, He understands this truth as well. And He operates in this same manner, and He would never, ever reinforce a negative behavior or disobedience in your life. And so, as you're walking through life and as you begin to kind of experience life and walk through life, sometimes you may experience, if you're walking in disobedience in any way, you may experience kind of some supernatural resistance from God. God is resisting that behavior because He doesn't want it to lead to further disobedience. He doesn't want it to lead to dysfunction and devastation or even separation from Him relationally. And so He will sometimes supernaturally resist that. Now, initially, as you're thinking through this may seem almost unloving from God. It may seem as if He's not supporting you or not loving you in the way that you perceive is best to be loved, but understand that God has created you. He knows you best. He knows exactly the way that you should function in life, and He knows what's best for you, and He desires what's best for you. As I talked about in my message this week, He desires that you experience true happiness and true success, and He will do anything in His power to make that happen. And so this week in your groups, I want you to begin to discuss this process. I want you to begin examining your lives and discussing amongst the group. I know this is a vulnerable thing, but be discussing maybe some areas in your life that you may be experiencing some supernatural resistance from God. If you are walking in disobedience in your relationships, in your finances, in your job, in any area, any time that you're walking in disobedience, you may be experiencing this kind of supernatural resistance from God because He knows what's best for you, and He would never give a negative, never reinforce a negative behavior. And the same thing is true. I want you to examine your lives and to look at the good things that are happening, the ways that God is blessing you in your life, the way that you see His favor at work in the areas that you're being obedient. And so I want you to discuss that this week in group. I know that that is a hard topic, but I know it will be beneficial as you begin to kind of work through it. And so, guys, I love you so much. I'm so proud of you. I'm praying for you, and I pray that you have a great discussion in your group this week.